go ahead and just talk about it later.
I'm looking around the room. We're going to make an announcement that I'm not sure is needed, but we're going to make the announcement anyway.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Gama, and I will be interpreting the meeting in Spanish. If anybody needs interpreting services, please come by and grab a device. Hola, buenas noches. Mi nombre es Ángela Gama. Voy a interpretar la reunión en español. Si alguien necesita servicios de interpretación, por favor pase a tomar un dispositivo. Gracias.
Thank you.
No, go ahead, Tim. It's your show.
Thank you. Thank you, President Newman, trustees. This was requested, or a workshop regarding the budget was requested by the school board about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I believe it was. And at that point, I think it may have been a little different timing than it is now, a year later. But still, as we move forward, going into the next couple of months, at least from my perspective, this is as important of information as anything else that the board is hearing or dealing with right now. And I recognize and appreciate the time knowing all the situations that the board is dealing with, the district is dealing with, but in order to move forward into the next fiscal year, again, I believe this is as important as anything else we do. So I appreciate the time we have. And I have to say, or I have to introduce Michelle Price. You'll notice Michelle Price's name is on the slide. She is the architect. Her and her staff, Jennifer next to her, is the architect of the budget. I'm very fortunate. We are very fortunate to have a qualified individual such as Michelle, who's been handling the budget for so many years and knows really knows the ins and outs. So hopefully at some point tonight she'll be able to provide some input. I am just here. I'm fortunate to be able to present, but again, I just want to state my thanks to Michelle for the work that she puts in every day. So tonight, this is what, first and foremost, this is your workshop. And so at any point in time, if there's anything you would like to ask or something you would like covered, please let me know. But as I put this together as to what I think is important for a school board, especially the fact that we have two new or newer school board members, it's kind of awkward, the timing, I believe, when you get seated in December. At that point in time, we're in the middle of a budget. We're asking you to approve a first interim budget, and now here we are, almost 6 months later, and we're going to be asking you to adopt a budget. So there's some things that I think are important, maybe for two of you that the other four have heard before. So I apologize for that, but I'm trying to put this in a perspective that every year we can review pretty much the same information with the school board, whether it's a new member or an existing member. So these are the items that I plan on touching on tonight. And again, please add anything or stop at any point in time if you have any questions as to the presentation. So just starting with planning and goal setting, I mean, this is something that may or may not be new to the budget process, but again, it's my belief, and it's something I think we need to get, we get to do every year, and it's something we have to get used to in regards to the budget, because the budget really is a short-term. It does state our short-term operational goals in the form of 1 year. Yeah, we'll talk about a multi-year projection, which encompasses two projection years, but the budget itself is our short-term goals for 1 year. Now, with that, ever since the local control funding formula also includes the local control accountability plan, and that states our instructional goals for the year, and you'll hear that at the next board meeting as well. And that is based on input from stakeholders, needs assessment, based upon the data and action and services year by year for 3 years. So we have to make sure that the budget that we're going to bring you with the LCAP ensures the actions, services, and goals are included in the budget. And so that's just part of planning. I threw this in. I thought it really, it really does make sense, especially for this time that we're going through. And really, our first long-term goal is to survive the short term. And so that really makes sense in these fiscal times. As we're going through, it's hard to project future years when each budget year is subject to an appropriation limit from Sacramento. So again, talking about planning and goal setting, it is a delicate balance because within our budget, we have to give you a spending plan for today's children, but not at the expense of tomorrow's children. And really, what does that mean? If you look in our current budget that we have, the last budget you saw at second interim, we have a projected deficit spending of about $26 million. And right now, based on that information and the multi-year projection, the last multi-year projection you saw for 18-19 had about a deficit of 10.7 million. So again, this means whatever decisions we're making today may or may not impact tomorrow's children. I stole this from our interim superintendent. It really does, if you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. We have enough money to do anything you need to do, but we don't have enough, but we can't do everything you want to do. So this is why we need to prioritize and know the difference between what are our wants and what are our needs when it comes to our budget. Financial yes.
I have one question on that previous slide. Can you, when it talks about 26 versus 10 million,
Yeah.
what, did we stop doing something that ends up pulling that 16 million out?
It's a combination. No, we didn't stop doing anything. I mean, it's a combination of new revenue. There's newer revenue added to next year. So yes. Yep.
Got it.
So when we talk about financial policy, some we have, some we don't have. As you know, we're in the process of updating board policies, either updating the ones we have or we're going to be adding ones we don't have. So as we look at our policies in regards to financial activity, it's important that we adopt at some point sound financial policies. We have Board Policy 3101, which is balancing the operating budget. Obviously, that's what we want to do. We want to adhere to that board policy. Issuing and managing debt, Board Policy 3470, that's coming soon. This is a conditional mandate. This is one of the items that have been identified as us needing, we do not have. We need to bring that forward for your approval because we do issue debt. And because we do that, we have to have a board policy that covers that. Using one-time revenues for one-time purposes, we do have also Board Policy 3101. We have that in existence. General Fund Reserves, we have Board Policy 3102. Contingency planning, we do not have. We will be recommending Board Policy 3460. It says to be recommended because it's not a mandate. It's not a conditional mandate. But again, I think it adopts sound financial policies if we have a board policy that talks about contingency planning. And so as we go forward, not only for adoption of the budget, but as we review it throughout the year, I think if we put our budget into the lens of these policies, it will make more sense as to what we're doing. So as a board member or as anybody, administration in the public, I think it's important to understand our reserves. You hear that a lot. What are your reserves? And as you'll see as we go through here, reserves can take on a different context, whether it's administration looking at it, whether it's a board looking at it, whether it's labor looking at it. There's different ways you can look at it, but I think it's important to understand the definition of the reserves. And whenever I stand in front of you or Michelle or anybody else, it really is the key to our budget credibility. So We have assigned and unassigned general fund and special reserve for other than capital outlay. This is noted in our audit report. When you see our ending fund balance, our auditors will include Fund 1 and Fund 17. So that's just, it's additional fund, but when we're looking at our reserves, we're not allowed to just look at Fund 1. We have to look at Fund 17 too. And right now, Fund 17, we set aside funds for future textbook material adoption. So we have to consider both of those anytime we're looking at our reserves and when we're looking at what percentage of reserves we have. We have a reserve for economic uncertainty that's established by the State Board of Education. It's set aside from our unassigned unrestricted reserve. So when you see that later on, you'll understand what that means. We're not allowed to use any restricted reserves to set aside for this 3%. So when you look at it as a percentage of our unrestricted budget, it's greater than 3% because we're not allowed to set aside restricted reserves for this, but we have to count the restricted expenditures in order to set this aside. And so for our district, it's based on 3% of our total expenditures. And it's only a minimum. And you will hear from myself or many people in my position that our needs, our ongoing needs are greater than this 3% requirement. So, however, I think at some point in the planning, when you go back to board policies, I think we're going to need to identify what we're comfortable with. If we're comfortable with 3%, or are we comfortable with something a little higher? Right now, we don't have anything greater than the 3%. Yes.
Is there a maximum that we're allowed to have?
Again, that would depend on, are you talking to management? Are you talking to labor? You know, we have to be good stewards of the dollars. And so if we're continuing to build our reserves, you know, then we're not spending the dollars, I would say, appropriately. So no, there isn't a maximum, and you'll see later on you'll see where we're at based on averages. But that's one of those situations where if you go around the room, it could be a different number depending on what you or who you represent. So, but there is no maximum.
That sort of is, I think, and if it's been explained to me correctly, if I understand it the right way, is that besides the 3%, the other thing that we can do, which I think is sort of maybe the Fund 17 is an example of it, is we can designate that we're going to put away for something. And so we can create our own individual rainy day funds for specific projects that we sort of know are sitting out there. And so it's not necessarily that, but it does let us put piles of money away to do specific things for specific purposes.
More like earmark rather than reserve.
Almost, yeah, because you know you're coming with it. And I guess worst case scenario, if something goes sideways, you could then say, okay, we earmarked this for this, but then this happens, so we're going to move it back. And so it's a way to create a bit more of a buffer zone, accounting-wise, because the state doesn't give us as much flexibility as we want, but you can create piles, if that's the best. Almost like retirement, you pile here, pile here, pile here, pile here, and they all add up to more than what you would have, if that makes.
It does, and you'll see that. I mean, you'll see that play out as we go through other slides as well. But these would be reasons why we would want something higher than a 3% reserve. These items right here, economic downturns and state level budget cuts. While we are currently in the second longest recovery in the state of California, and you'll see that.
Yep.
There, by the governor's own admission and others, there is another economic downturn on the horizon at some point. Do we see state level budget cuts happening anytime soon? No, we don't. But I mean, those came on us real quickly in 2008, 2009 as well. So declining enrollment and loss of funding. Yes, we are declining enrollment, but not at a level. You know, I mean, we're going to watch this year to see if last year's drop continues on, or if we're going to kind of level off or start to go back up. If it continues to drop at the same level it did, 200 to 300 students at the elementary level, then, you know, this would be a concern of ours as well, because when our students drop, our revenue drops as well. Unplanned expenses, carryover balances, cash shortages. I mean, these are all things you'll see as we go through the presentation. So when we talk about reserves, and the board, we've asked the board in our budget planning to transfer some of our reserves out to other funds. We just talked about that. These are board-approved already transfers as we go through our budget assumptions, budget development. These are transfers that the board has approved. $5 million, that's ongoing for facility maintenance. We have 2.5 million that goes to Fund 17. It was 1 million. We've increased that now by $1.5 million to 2.5 million. Lease revenue sinking fund deposit. This one's kind of, for those of you that have been around may know this, but this is for our qualified school construction bonds that we have. These were for facility projects. We have to pay them back. We have other funds to set aside, but this is $400,000 out of the general fund that we use to make that annual payment.
Isn't that the Grigori Stadium?
I'm not sure what it was used for, the qualified school construction bond. It could be. Yeah. So yes, it could be. I don't have the project detail in front of me. I can get that for you as well.
Back in 2011, 10, 11, yeah.
And so we make an annual interest and principal payment. It comes from multiple funds, comes from developer fees, but $400,000 of the principal comes from the general fund through this transfer to this Fund 56. Special Reserve Fund, this is another fund that we talked about, or as mentioned, Fund 40. We transferred just shy of $3 million for the various reasons: white fleet vehicle replacement, auditorium replacement, reprographics, equipment replacement, emergency facility needs. This is different than the $5 million. So what this is a replenishment only. So it's not like we put $2 million every year and it grows. If we were to have an emergency, we needed to tap into this for $500,000. Then the next year we would put, or that budget year, we would put $500,000 back to get to the $2 million level.
So if we wanted to do, there's two things we've talked about. Well, there's one thing we've talked about, and then another thing I'd like to maybe see on a list here. The first would be Wilson, that we had talked about, and I recognize the intent is for us to go out for a bond, but you know, we did have money set aside for Wilson. Burbank cost more than we expected. We ate the Wilson budget with the Burbank deal, which Burbank ended up being great, but you know, putting some money aside for that, and then being that we're looking toward a bond for our elementary school district, I'm thinking a line item where we could put money in for our high school, like just on our older high schools, you know, whatever comes up through the LCAP, but high school restroom improvement. I think that would be, I know that would be something my children would like, but that would be on some of our older high school campuses, just you know, refurbishment of some of the facilities, and then safety, like you know, high school safety, you know, somehow some money set aside for some projects at the high school, and I'm not sure what that amount would be, but I'd almost rather see that line item at this point, because I'm betting on Chad and the team, and the people that are going to be successful on a bond, that I'm betting on it. So that I think that maybe a line item in there so would that be in this category?
It would be eventually, and you're getting a little ahead of me. I mean, you'll see that in a minute.
Okay.
But no, those are good questions. I mean, this would be, it would require a transfer out of our general fund reserves. And anytime you talk about either an assignment of reserves, which we'll have in a minute, or a transfer of reserves, that lowers the ending fund balance. So when we talked earlier about our reserve levels, when we increase one of these areas or add to it, then that reduces the reserves, and you'll see the impact of that in a minute. But we do have a slide later on when we talk about Wilson Cafeteria, and that would be a point for any other additions as well.
So some of these items in that transfer fund are annual contributions to, and others are maintaining a balance. Is that correct?
Everything you see up there in front of you, or on slide 9, with the exception of the $2 million, is an annual transfer of the funds. So the $2 million we have, I mean, if, like I said, if we were to need, if something were to happen, and we would need to have immediate cash on hand for that, we would dip into it and then replenish it that year to $2 million. So it's not like, again, we're not putting $2 million aside every year and it's growing like the $5 million for the first facility maintenance fund. If we don't spend the $5 million, if we only spend $4 million, then next year we have $6 million available. So, I mean, if I answered your question.
Possible to add another line item here and designate an amount to build towards a future balance.
Yes, and that would be at the board's direction, yes.
Can I, so that I understand this would be more, because I think I've got this right, but for Trustee Lopez and Dr. West, an example, if I got this right, on the emergency facility needs on the 2 million, that will be like when we had the fire earlier this year, and we needed to get money out to start that project rolling while we waited on those insurance claims to come in and start rebuilding. That's where we would go into that for, right?
That would be, yes, that would be an emergency. We didn't need to do that this year, or we didn't do it, but yes, that would be, I mean, if there's something we needed cash immediately for, we couldn't wait, then, and dip into our reserves. If we didn't have reserves, then this would be the last resort, yes.
Great.
So those are transfers of reserves. So we transfer those dollars to another fund to be spent out of those funds. Then we also have assignment of reserves. And this is where understanding the reserves and the annual fund balance is important. We have to set aside, as previously mentioned, 3% of our total general fund expenditures. That comes right off the bottom line. We have an adjustment for the county cash fair market value. We hold our cash in the county treasury. And it is on deposit or it's pooled with other county agencies. It's invested on our behalf by the county treasurer. But we have to, every year, when we give you the audit or the unaudited actuals, you will see an adjustment, a county cash fair market value is for the dollars that we have held in the county treasury that's pooled with other government agencies. LCAP supplemental and concentration grant funds right now in the multi-year projection, because we do not have an approved spending plan for next year. Michelle has set aside what she believes is our growth allocation in supplemental and concentration, and you'll see that amount in a minute. But that is assigned in our reserves because those dollars have to go to the local control accountability plan and be spent that way. Carryover miscellaneous, these amounts fluctuate every year. So right now what we're doing, or as we go through and close the books, some administrators are asking the budget department for approval. They're not going to spend it this year in the next 6 weeks, but they would like to carry it over and spend it maybe in July or August. Those will, while right now we have nothing in there, those will grow as we go through the summer and go through closing the books. And then one-time expenditures. This is another one that we replenish annually. It's in our reserves. These are for unexpected, non-budgeted purchases. So you would say, well, hey, wait a minute, we have emergencies over here, but this is different. These are for unplanned items that come up. Requests go to superintendent's cabinet, and we either give it a thumbs up or thumbs down as far as items that aren't currently addressed in the budget to $250,000. So if we didn't have anything for the year, we wouldn't need to replenish this. But if we utilize 200,000 of it, then we would then reserve the next year back to $250,000. These are reserves, not transfers, and you'll see in a minute the difference.
On the county cash fair market value adjustment, that's where we're parking our cash.
Mhm.
And so my assumption there is that that's very much similar to what you would think of as putting them in, whatever you call it, when you have your mutual funds and you've got your high value, super safe, interest-based sort of rolling dollars. Do we see that sort of inching up as interest rates inch up so that it's very safe so you don't get a lot of return on it?
Right.
But as we sort of speed up and the economy picks up and they get their inflation worries on, that interest rate ticks up and we get a bit more out of that, right?
We do, and for the amount of cash that we have on deposit, I mean, even a little bit of an interest increase, it makes a big difference. So, and I believe if quarterly we give you the you'll see the investment reports from the county treasury, and you'll see how our investments are doing on our behalf. So yes, but the county, the county handles that for us. So Okay, so when you look at our reserves, our local reserves, there's there's different ways to look at it as I started, and depending on the time period, it could be a different picture. So you have 3 columns. You have 15-16 unaudited actuals, 16-17 unaudited actuals, and then 17-18 second interim. We have an ending balance, so that's what we start with. We have to set aside what we call non-spendables. We have a revolving cash account. We have a revolving cash account that we have to have reserves for. In our ending fund balance, we have stores, which is inventory. So again, that fluctuates up and down, and then prepaid expenditures. So those are those. You can see how it changes between whether it's an unaudited actual or it's an interim reporting period. And then we have restricted. So these are dollars that come to us with a restriction. It can only be spent on something that we do not get to say. I mean, it's given to us, and we're told how to expend those dollars. And if we don't, we have to reserve them in our ending fund balance. So that's why you'll notice in the unaudited actual years, it's greater. In our budget year, which is second interim, it's less, because now we're budgeting to plan to spend those dollars. When we close the books, this will grow from $7.5 million. I don't know that it'll grow back to 19 million, but it will grow from $7.5 million because we never spend 100% of our allocation, not even on the restricted side. Committed, we haven't asked the board to commit any dollars, but we have assignments. Going back to a prior slide, these are our assignments. And again, you'll see how they vary, whether it's an end of the year period or it's a budget year. Right now, we don't have any carryovers. The big one here is in the assigned, it's carryovers. We have those at the end of the year. Now we're planning to spend those carryover dollars, and so it's part of our budget. That's why it's not in our reserves. And then you see our reserve for economic uncertainties, and that typically grows because that is a percentage of our expenditures. As our expenditures grow every year, this amount will grow. It's 3% of what our expenditures are. And then you finally get to our unassigned ending fund balance. So again, I mean, when you look at the first column, we have an ending fund balance. If somebody tells you, wow, you have $77 million, well, no, we don't. You or we in that year have 41 million. That's how much of our actual reserve we have. So depending on who's looking at it, how they're looking at it, it may tell a different story. So talking about our unrestricted ending fund balance, 2016-17 average unrestricted general fund plus Fund 17. As I said earlier, the state makes us look at Fund 1 plus 17. Our net balances as a percentage of our total general fund expenditures and transfers out. These are averages. So for a unified district, it's 16.64%. An elementary district across the state of California is 21%, and a high school district is 17%. We most associate with a unified district, so we would be somewhere around the 16.64%. Government Finance Officers Association recommends a minimum of 2 months. Going back to a conversation earlier, how much is enough? Again, a minimum recommendation is 2 months of our expenses, which typically, on average, is about 17% of a school district's budget. For us, on the bottom, these are our unassigned. So going back to that previous column where you saw unassigned, for 16-17, a year ago at this time, when we presented or you were presented with the estimated actuals, it was 12.21%. When we actually presented our unaudited actuals later on, after the summer, it was 17.01%. So this is a case where we said we were going to spend something, we didn't, so our ending fund balance grew. It went from 12.2 to 17%. And then second interim, right now, the last time you saw or approved a budget, it was 13.18. So again, based on that trend, I would expect the 13% to grow as we close the books.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. They said we need to speak into the microphone. Sorry.
Yours may not be on, which could be a problem.
1, 2. Oh, here.
Hello.
There you go.
No.
That sounds like it's on now.
It sounded like it was on.
Yep.
Yeah, it's on. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So when we look at our unassigned, unrestricted, this number's down in red at the bottom. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends those numbers should be 17% of our budget, and we're looking at, well, they were on our unaudited actuals. So we did hit that range where they recommend for the unaudited actuals, but in our budget, the estimated actuals, it was 12.21.
Yeah, a year ago in June at the public hearing, you were presented with estimated actuals and then the budget for this year. And right at that point in time, it was estimated we would close the books at around 12%. When we actually went through the summer, Michelle and her staff did what needs to be done. It grew from 12% to 17%, and which is common. I mean, we do, again, we don't spend everything we plan to spend.
Right.
So when we closed the books, we were just about average with other unified districts. I mean, the average was 16.64. We were 17.01. Is that too much? Again, the bargaining units may say yes. We may say, well, no, we need this much of our monthly expenditure set aside in case something were to happen. I mean, so it's a balancing act. It really is. Right now, in our second interim, and which may change a little bit when we bring you estimated actuals with the budget adoption, but right now it's 13.18%. So we're spending down our reserves. But we do know we did have settlement of contract negotiations with all of our employees this last year that is going to bring that level down. So. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I know.
Me, I have not been
Smells like burnt popcorn in here, but I'm not sure what happened.
Could be. Who knows? So when you look at our ending fund balance over time, these are unaudited actuals that you're looking at, and so we have we have a trend where we were going up, then we dropped, and then we're growing up again to 16, 17. You'll notice that was that when we closed the books, there was a large growth in our ending fund balance to the 17%. And you can see how much of that is unrestricted and how much is restricted. And then where we're at. Now, the last two columns are projections. 17-18 is based on second interim. 18-19 is the multi-year projection based on second interim. And so you can see that if we were to spend everything we say we're going to spend, get every dollar we're supposed to receive, we would be on a pattern where our ending fund balance is declining. So that's where we're at. I fully expect 17-18 when we close the books, at least that top piece of that, the gray piece, that will grow. That the restricted balance will grow to be something closer to what you see in the prior years before that. So again, this is just a picture of our ending fund balance and broken out between restricted and unrestricted. The blue line obviously is what I would be most interested in. That determines our fiscal health. That determines dollars that the board gets to allocate for certain reasons. However, I mean, that's the area that labor would watch if I was labor to see, okay, how's that progressing? If that's progressing, then we're not spending to the level that we probably could be spending to. So that's just one way to take a look at that. Now we break it down even further into what's our components. We talked about earlier our assignments. And so looking at this chart, the bottom piece is our unassigned. And we went a number of years, you can see where it really didn't fluctuate a whole lot. That's a good thing. I mean, really, that is a good thing. And then 16, 17, it grew. And then, of course, we had subsequent salary agreements that are now going to bring that down, or at least projected to bring that down, is why 17, 18, and 18, 19, you can see it shrinking. Those are projections. I again want to point out those are projections. As we get closer to closing the books, those are going to change. But you can see everything else stays relatively the same. Pretty much our economic uncertainties, which is the third color up, and you can see how that grows a little bit every year. That grows as our expenditure level grows. So now we want to talk about, again, I think it's important, what is a budget? I mean, again, we can go around and probably get 10 different answers as to what a budget is. These are what I believe it is. It's a policy document. It should reflect the philosophy of the board, administration, and the education community. It should reflect the input from all of those stakeholders. It is a financial plan. It shows where we've been, and it should show where we're going when we start talking about the multi-year projection, an operations guide, and most importantly, I believe a communications device. It's our opportunity and our ability to share with the community, with our stakeholders, our story. And really our story should be what's our budget. When we talk about budget development, and we have, as we're going through, we have different assumptions that we're using right now to build our budget. Revenue assumptions, initially based on governor's January budget proposal. So we started this whole process with what the governor had proposed in January. We now know what the governor is changed it to in what's called the May revision. We know that information now, and our numbers have been updated and reflected in our multi-year projection. And we also have expenditure assumptions. Staffing levels have been reviewed and updated for current enrollment projections. That's the first thing we do in January. We look at our enrollment. We bring the board an enrollment report, what we think our trends are going to be going forward, and how that impacts staffing levels. Michelle has spent the last 2 months obtaining site and department detailed budgets based on historical trends. We've talked about, again, our budget will be presented at a public hearing with the LCAP. So any additional actions and services from the LCAP will be included in our budget. Scheduled capital outlay or debt service obligations, and then effects of 2018-19 negotiations once settled. These are all things that would be assumptions in our budget. So now we talk about specifics. And as we look going forward, we have new base revenue from the local control funding formula, almost $11 million. That's base. I just want to be clear, that's only base. That does not count supplemental and concentration grant funds. So as we build that, okay, what takes first call for those dollars? And so we have built-in step and column increases for our employees. They either move classified and certificated staff, move down in steps, or certificated staff, depending on any units they get throughout the year, then they could move them over on the salary schedule. So that would be a column increase. So again, when we look historically, what's our step and column increase for all of our employees? It's about $3 million. That is built into our budget as an ongoing cost. Textbook adoptions, we talked about that earlier. We've increased that. The reason you see this here is we've increased that 1 million transfer to 2.5 million. So we've taken $1.5 million, either of reserves or of our base revenue. We've taken that and said, we've got commitments in the out years for textbook adoptions. These are dollars we're going to need. Again, bus replacement, we've increased that by $90,000. And then you've heard us talk about this. You hear it all the time. Pension. This is a decision that was made in Sacramento. You didn't get a make. I didn't get a make. Unions didn't get a make. So, again, first call, the new dollars. It comes to pension reform, $3.2 million. That's a year-over-year increase between our current year and next year for STRS. That would be for certificated employees, and $1.28 million, almost $1.3 million for PERS. That would be for our classified employees. So those are, and we'll talk in a minute about purchasing power. We know how our revenues have grown, but our expenses are growing too. And then you see facilities. This would be the point where the board would say, okay, set aside some dollars for Wilson Cafeteria. We do have architectural estimates, just came in today. I believe it's around $4.2 million. That is just, I want to be clear, because I was not here with Burbank, but that is just for demolishing the cafeteria that's there and building a new one. That doesn't include any other classroom replacements. There's nothing there at this point in time that would be just for a cafeteria. And it's my understanding that as Burbank project grew to include classroom replacements, then that's why the Wilson cafeteria got delayed. That may or may not be factually true, but that's how I understand it. So, so in order to put money aside, increase that transfer, board action would either come from our reserves, or again, when we look at what's our new revenue, and how are we going to account for everything that we have to account for.
If that's going back to Amy,
Microphone.
talking the microphone, going back to what Amy was asking about, if we're setting up here and we've got the $5 million sitting there for Wilson's cafeteria, the bond goes over and passes well, then we've got funding on the elementary side. That's when we would be talking about, at least your idea of saying, do we shift that over to the high school side and start looking at maintaining that, since we're going to have another revenue stream for the elementaries? Does that sort of jive with what you were getting at? Or do both?
Well, I mean, we could, it might be a way to show to the public a good faith that, hey, we've set aside money for this. This is what we're putting into it. And then, hey, public, put your dime into it. So it may be a way to market the bond, or to get public buy-in to the bond.
Okay.
But I'm just thinking about another, being that we're just looking at our elementary school sites, we do have old high schools. We have Downey, Davis, Modesto High that are old.
I would agree.
So some of the same needs in our elementary schools are present in those three high schools particularly. So as we limp along till we would do a high school bond, if and when, then we would need to think about what we would want to do for our high school facilities, and what that would be or not. But I'd like to see us put some money aside at this point to do that, to maybe an annual amount, and it would grow it, so that we could figure out, okay, this is the most pressing need of our high schools. This is what we need to do the most, and something that would be along the lines of a Wilson cafeteria, something that's a pretty substantial project. I mean, I know we're doing things. We did substantial improvements just 2 years ago, Bayer, with the gymnasium and the ADA compliance issues all around it, and then the drop off and then the drop off and exit there, and then the back side, yeah, and the bathroom, yeah. So that was significant work at Bayer High School. I forgot Bayer's old too, because they had their 40th anniversary, so they're old too. So just maybe something like I'm not sure which one and what we would look at. I have to go back to the
$1 billion binder.
our book of needs, and certainly ask our team, our capable team of facility experts, of what they would think. But if we had a certain amount we'd shove away each year, then after we get through some building projects on the elementary, we could have a nice tidy sum set aside to do something on our high school. And then we could say, again, it could be used. The projects we've done with our general funds are going to help us earn favor with the public. What we've done to Burbank, we've used general funds. We're trying to make these things happen, and so we show we're good stewards of it. I think we need to be planning.
Yeah, I would agree, because I think we've also talked about, because you do look at Downey, Mo High, and Davis, and certainly when you get on those sites, when you compare to when I'm over in my neighborhood in Enox, there's a drastic difference, and I think we do need to start looking at how we address those needs, because they are older facilities, and it's quite obvious once you step foot on those campuses, the differences between one side of town and the other, and I like the thought process.
I'm thinking what we did with curriculum at one time was we had a growing amount that we put in, it was an amount each year, and then we spent it down. Does anybody remember that?
I think it's still on here, right? Textbook adoptions?
I think we spent it.
Correct.
I think
Now
we
we're
put it in for a number of years. And then we spent it. I think we spent it. Yeah.
Trustee Brown?
got a question. On this slide that we're looking at now, you've got the new revenue of about $10+ million or 11 million, and then the items down below total about 10. So that's not, is that coincidence, or are we saying this is how we could use that 11?
No, what this, the intent of this was for, was to see how everything competes with each other.
Yeah.
And going back to earlier talking about planning and priorities and wants and needs, we don't probably want or need the pension reform, but I mean, that's something we have to do. So I guess the intent of this was to show the board, because, I mean, $11 million is, I mean, to anyone is a lot of money. I mean, even a board member. And so you think, wow, we can do a lot of things with that. And as we start pulling things out, some that are already committed to new money, then this is the reason why potentially our ending fund balance shows we're going down, because some of these costs we're being burdened with these costs, but we're not receiving revenue from the state to cover those. So no, it would be just strictly a coincidence. It's just to show the board that there's a lot competing. When we start talking about new base revenue, there's a lot of competing things going on. In order to do everything or more than what you plan, it's going to require going into the reserves to what level the board is comfortable going. So that's really the intent of here.
I think at this time, we don't have a specific project that we'd want to do in our high schools, but we would want to start setting aside some money to do some things as we, see fit. We can, we got some CTE dollar, didn't we get that we used for the Downey kitchen? Those were different dollars. So sometimes with our high schools, unlike for our elementary, we can get dollars that come from someplace else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just real quick, I'll add to that, Trustee Marks, real quick. And we are doing some substantial improvement at Downey this year.
Yeah.
I mean, with that $5 million, part of that $5 million that we have for facilities, we are doing some substantial work at Downey this year in the form of removing buildings that no longer are useful and replacing them with more useful buildings. So I apologize.
Oh, no, don't. That's fine. No, I'm glad you said that. I was just thinking too along those lines was some safety that we might need to do, finish the locks on the doors so that and I believe our fences are in good shape, but just to ensure that there's some safety issues. And I know some school districts around the state, instead of putting bulletproof windows in, they've put a screen, not a screen, but some kind of sheer form that goes on the windows that keeps it so you can't see in, but it doesn't block your the amount of light that comes into the room, but it just protects them from any intruders. Only because we discussed safety this weekend, and so it's kind of top on my issue from just thinking about what do we still need to do in our campuses to ensure that they're safe, and thinking about our high schools. I believe our elementary bond will cover our elementary schools, but the high schools. And then the other one that I was thinking about, especially from the discussion that I had with the students, was Beyer High School, because it was built like a honeycomb and it doesn't really have doors for some of the classrooms. That a student mentioned that was a real safety issue for her. There was a teacher that's her father, but it's one of those things that if I were in one of those classrooms, I would be concerned as well, that you're in a closed environment and you can't get out. So I thought if we ever do redo anything, I think Beyer ought to change, because when it was built, it was a different mentality when we built that school, and a whole different view of how we built schools, which was new at the time, but it's not as safe as we'd like to have for our teachers that serve there. So those are just some options, and I know we'd have a lot more discussion about that in the future if we were going to set aside funding.
So Interim Superintendent Ridquist has directed myself and Roger Orth to bring back really a condition of locks at each school site, fences, gates, and so we're in that process right now, and then we could at some point, and we will be bringing forth options and with dollar amounts attached to those.
Okay, good. good.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Based
I know.
upon time and the number of pages, and we went through this earlier today.
Right.
So I know there were some other things, so
Right.
I don't want to cut anybody off, I just want to make sure that we have sufficient time to be able to hit all the comments.
Yes, and I mean, this is really this right here is really the meat and potatoes. As we get farther on, you'll be seeing some other things about policy updates and other stuff. But I mean, this is really, right here, this is it. I mean, this is where the board can provide input into as we move forward, going to the public hearing and also for final budget development. So,
I'm going to chime in on Cindy's thing only because I read too much. And so I was reading and I saw this bit about safety windows. And it was interesting because we'd have to go out of state and they'd probably kill us on shipping. But one of the reasons things worked out in Parkland was because they had hurricane windows. And so it wasn't bulletproof glass windows, but because it's Florida, they had hurricane strength windows. It's just one of those things you throw out there thinking outside of the box. What would be the difference in buying those sort of windows and having them shipped in versus something else? And it may be crazy thinking outside the box, but it was just something I read that you never think about until you read it and it just stuck in my head, and then I'll be quiet.
Okay.
So are you looking for numbers from us, Tim? Like, so
No.
let's put aside X amount right now, or you just, or
we're
just,
looking for board's priorities, board's direction as to what you would like to build towards, or
I'd like to
so-
see a line item that we would work towards a high school facility improvement, and we'll leave it open if that's possible of what it would be. And the number I'd leave up to your discretion of
Okay.
what that could be. We could grow it, but I think we need to start squirreling some money aside, like we did a few years prior to trying to go out for a bond. And I think it's prudent so that we can make sure we get some goodwill.
Okay. Okay. And so what you see up there is base revenue increases. What you don't see is supplemental and concentration. Before I showed you an assignment in our ending fund balance that we have until we have an LCAP spending plan. But the growth in supplemental and concentration, which is above the base grant for LCAP purposes, is $8 million. So that's what Marla is working with as she prepares LCAP for next year. We're projecting $8 million in growth in our supplemental and concentration grant funds, in addition to the $11 million that is ongoing base revenue. As well, we have one-time discretionary funds. These are already in our multi-year projection. It's interesting. We're now in our fourth year of one-time funds. So at what point do they become ongoing? But the outgoing governor, this was his way of controlling controlling the appropriations every year. So any excess funds, as the economy got better and better, the governor would fund Prop 98 at the minimum level, and then over appropriate the dollars for one time. That way it's not ongoing. That way, as soon as the state's economy goes backwards, then they're not subject to these ongoing appropriations they can't afford. That's the theory. Whether we agree with it or not, that's open to determination. But this governor has done a great job as being fiscally conservative, no matter where your political preference lies. He has been fiscally conservative. We could argue that his priorities of putting dollars away for the state to account for bad times do not match with what he's asking districts to do. But again, it's been one-time funds for his administration as dollars have come back to us. So January, he was proposing 299, 8.45 million. That was in our multi-year projection. May revision, now this just been released, it's up to 344. So again, as the economy's gotten better, this governor puts it into one-time appropriations. And you can see that also in the language, it offsets the state's outstanding mandate claims. So at some point, they're going to say, hey, we're settled up. All those prior year mandates, we don't owe you any more money from what we deferred from you during the recession time. So, okay, so now I think we can move a little quicker, but you've all seen this, the LCFF entitlement. It was designed to close the achievement gap. Components are base grants per pupil by 4 grade spans, and then we get supplemental and concentration grant funding based on the number of unduplicated pupil percentage students we have. So that's why the $8 million in supplemental concentration grant funds is a lot of money, because we have a high number of students that fall into this category. All funds, even the supplemental concentration grant funds, and you'll see why this is important, are unrestricted. They're part of our unrestricted budget. Even though we have to spend them for a certain purpose on the supplemental concentration grant side, they're part of our unrestricted budget. So as we look at our revenues historically, this is a good trend. I mean, this is really a good trend. The bottom piece is unrestricted. The top piece is restricted. So you can see we like to see it going up. What you don't see is prior to 9/10. I mean, this would be like, wow. I mean, you got, if the community was to see this, they would be like, wow, you guys are getting more money than anybody else. What are you complaining about? And I would say the same thing. But if you go back prior to 9/10, you'll see how it dropped off. So at that point in 07, 08, where we were at a certain level, had there not been a recession and we just grew by inflation, we would be at the 17, 18 level. So it would have grown at a much smaller pace. So all they've done, or all the economy has allowed them to do,
Restore us to where we
is to
were.
put us back to the same level we were at in 08, like, with inflation growth. So while this is great, while this is nice, and again, I don't want to sound like this isn't a good thing, but it's not like we had this steep increase in revenues. It put us back on pace where we were in 2007, 2008.
Yep.
So as we talk about the budget, we talk about budget control. Revenues are defined by the federal government, the state government, or the donor that gives them to us. We don't get much say in that. But the board gets to decide, as we talked about, how we spend the funds. When you look at our budget, the majority of our budget, as any district budget, it's not unique to Modesto City Schools, is spent on people. And for us, it's, as of second interim, it's 76% of our total budget, $350 million, somewhere roughly that area. 76% of that is spent on people. Now, if you break that down further and look at our unrestricted dollars you get to control, we get to control, it's 82% of our budget. So again, depending on how you want to look at it, how you want to tell the story, there's two different ways to look at it. Neither one of those are bad. I mean, that's probably about average. It may even be a little less than average. But again, what's the story? The majority of our funds go to people. And so a small percentage, if you were to see a pie, the smaller pieces of the pie would be what we get to ask you to allocate. So mistakes in staffing budget could cause a fiscal crisis. That's not a concern here, and we'll talk about that right now, but many districts, much smaller districts, if they make a mistake in their staffing, those are ongoing costs that could disrupt their budget. Why are staffing formulas important? So it helps document the core, so that supplemental concentration grant and categorical funds can be used as supplementary services and not supplanting. So the whole point is, with these dollars, we're supposed to improve or increase services. If we're using these funds to pay for third grade teachers that we already had, that's not the intent of those dollars. That's the difference between supplement and supplanting. Staffing formulas build the standard building block. Is the first thing that Michelle does when she's building the budget, because it's such a big piece of our budget. So I'm pleased to say that, I mean, in this district, this is not a concern. There's great communication between personnel, between the budget office, as far as our staffing formulas and our allocations going forward. So when we look at our expenditures on the general fund, we saw our revenues. You would expect this. I'm sorry?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know your protocol for a meeting like this. I mean, before we get too far away from a security issue and a safety issue, which I'm really glad that the lady in pink
Yeah.
brought up, I wanted to ask about the follow-up to school safety sleeves for doors that keep doors from opening. I think one person from Brett Bory
Yep.
brought that up.
Right.
2 weeks ago. It was part of safety issues for schools, and I wanted to know view and have some signal if somebody untoward is on campus. Because there's a big issue around safety, and I'm not really sure Modesto City Schools is doing anything about training staff for drills and students as well as administrators who are in schools to know how to speak in a situation of peril.
And these are great questions, and it would take like a whole board agenda item. Yeah. This is we're really just addressing like the budget issues, but these questions all about safety. We've done some comprehensive reports on that, and I'm sure that if you give your contact information, we can have somebody from our from either like Ed Miller or someone to reach out. So Marla, Ms. Mack would get your information, so she could reach out if you wanted more information. That we've done some recent camera items, and so there's a lot of recent things that we've done. But certainly as we move forward, if we are successful with the bond, so maybe you want to volunteer to help be successful with the bond, that'd be great. And you could give your name to Trustee Brown right over here. As we move forward with that, part of that would be a safety component that we could increase that on our elementary sites. But on our high school sites, that's what we're addressing, that we maybe want to put some money aside as we move forward. But we are addressing these needs. There was a recent item on our cameras that we just spent. Does someone remember that number?
I don't remember the number, but you're right. We did just upgrade cameras.
Big time.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are ongoing items that we are constantly addressing. I think we've done some comprehensive things that we are addressing the needs of our students' safety.
But may I just add, I spent like an hour on the phone with Ed Miller, who's child welfare and attendance. Yes, and just so you're aware that we do training on a regular basis.
Yes.
The lockdowns are in order for us to make our campuses safe in case there's a shooter outside or inside. And so that's something that we do all the time. And then for all schools, every school's been trained to do
Every
that.
school.
We work with the police department, sheriff's department, the fire department, the OES, which is the Office of Emergency Services. So they're all coordinated together, and we have someone that comes in and kind of, we'll call it an audit, a safety audit, but he comes and ensures that we're all consistent with how we plan and how we respond to emergencies. And so we're doing that on a regular basis, just so you're aware, because I don't think the public's fully aware of that, but that's something that we've been doing for many years, and we do it every year. So, yeah, it's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for your question.
Yes.
So here's a historical trend of our expenditures, and again, you would expect those to be going up for those built-in costs that we talked about earlier, but also because our revenue is going up. So this shows that as our revenue goes up, our expenses are keeping pace with the increase in revenues, and it really shows when you look at it this way. So our revenues is blue, the expenses are gray, and again, from my seat and my hat, this is a good trend. I mean, prior to 17-18, you want the blue line to be at or above the gray line. That's coming from me. There's different ways to look at that, but this shows a healthy balance where our any fund balance is growing. At what level do we want it to grow? And then you get to 17-18, 18-19, you can see where we're spending some of those reserves that we had built up. And now, as we look at unrestricted, again, this is healthy. This is very healthy. And you'll see on the next slide why we want the gap here to be larger than the other gap on the unrestricted side, because these are our restricted dollars. So you can see for our restricted programs, we do not receive enough funds to operate those, mainly special education. And it requires some of the blue funds over here from the blue bar in order to bring that up and balance these out. We have to balance this. So we can't be in a deficit pattern on our restricted areas. It requires what's called a general fund contribution from the unrestricted funds, and you'll see details on that as we go forward. Multi-year projections, again, this is the future planning, and it is required by law. We in every district must certify that we can meet our financial obligations both in this year and 2 projection years. And so it's every time we bring you either a budget or an interim report, we have to bring you a corresponding multi-year projection to show that today's decisions, what impact it's going to have on future years. They are projections, they're not forecasts. Projections are expected to change as various factors change. One thing that's very important, if you were to go look at our first interim projection, that was before the governor released his proposals for this next budget year. We were working on a whole different set of factors. That changed drastically after January. So our second interim multi-year projection was much better than our first interim multi-year projection. We're only as good as the factors at that point in time, at that given point in time. They are predictions of the future, and they will change as underlying factors change. So just know that when you see a multi-year projection, that could be very different 3 months later as the factors change. Again, just more why it's important. It is a picture of our projected financial future, and it allows Michelle, if I say, Michelle, what's the impact of this decision, whatever it is, whether it's bargaining or it's a capital outlay or whatever, what's that impact today on future budgets? That's easy to do. She can do that very quickly. So it does become, and it is used to be our long range. We talked earlier about short term. This is our long range financial plan that we have. This is the dartboard. These are some items that are built into that for future years. And you can see what our concerns are. Because going forward, starting in 1920, we're only going to be seeing revenue growth at these projected levels. We're fully funded. There's no more gap funding. There's no more closure of the gap, one-time infusions of dollars to get us back to where we should be. Going forward now, we're back to what's called COLA. It really isn't a COLA. There's this formula that nobody can really explain that has to do with a lot of factors, but they do call it a statutory COLA because that's a revenue increase. So special education, other areas of funding, this is the only growth that they're going to see going forward, which is a concern because our expenses are growing at a faster pace than that. And again, we talked about this earlier, and you can see now this shows the multi-year projection. You can see the employer cost in 17-18 at 14.43%, going to 19.1 in the year 2021. There's nothing we can do about that. So in our multi-year projection for 1920, that's an increase of 3.2 million. For 2020-21, that's an increase of 1.7 million. Those are projections based on today's employment. So that's what we project. But going back to 16-17, that represents a $10.9 million increase that you had no say over. Yes.
And how often are they, I mean, I know they just did an increase in April. How often are they doing that? Is it an annual increase that they're looking at us employers to increase our amount? Or is it more than an annual increase, the STRS and PERS employer contribution portion?
So the second bullet for STRS, under current law, once the statutory rates are achieved, so 2020-21, STRS will have the authority to marginally increase or decrease. So that would be annually. They've set these rates to 2020-21 for pension reform to help offset the obligations that are growing. So these are what they need. And that could change. I mean, once we get there, they could continue to increase that. But for STRS, these are rate increases only to 2020-21 because that's in statute.
Okay.
And part of this is going to be because of, at least my understanding is part of why they sort of inched this thing up, is their return on investment isn't enough to cover the liability sitting out there. And so if they could magically find a way to get better return on their investment, and for lack of better words, to be a little humorous here, channel their inner Warren Buffett and sort of, not Warren Buffett, wrong guy, but it's a return on investment issue more than anything else because their liabilities are growing at a much higher rate than their returns are.
And I wish I had a slide for that. I didn't include it because there's a lot of slides. But yes, I'll show that at a future meeting, and you'll see. I mean, you'll see that right there. They took a big hit when the market crashed in the 20-some% range. And so they're growing back out of that, yes.
I'm good with just knowing in my head that I understand the underlying issue, because you don't always know that you read stuff is true.
That is very true. And then the PERS, again, now PERS goes farther out to 2024, 25. PERS does adopt these every year, so this will change every year. And then you can see the increases, and it's $5.4 million increase since 2016, 17 for PERS. So again, we're gonna talk about purchasing power, but again, multi-year projections, using it as a tool. One-time funds are just that, one time. So we have to take them out of our multi-year projection, Michelle. So whatever is in this year for one-time discretionary funds, for next year it's out until January comes, and then the new governor decides to put them in or not. So they're one time, they're out of our projection years. A future recession is predicted, but we don't know the timing, and you'll see a chart on that in a minute. Low COLA environment on programs that require unrestricted general fund contributions, that's special education, and then increasing PERS and STRS employer obligations. So contributions. Unrestricted general fund contributions show a 17% increase during the multi-year projection. So for our 2 projection years, these are dollars from the unrestricted general fund. And why is that? Routine restricted maintenance. Right now we're operating on some flexibility. Prior to the budget reductions, you didn't have flexibility. It was 3%. We have to set aside 3% of our funds for routine restricted maintenance activities. Right now we're 2%. That's our requirement, and so you can see where we're at in the multi-year projections. Just shy of $8 million in the year 1920. We have to go back to 3%, and so that's 11. Almost $12 million. So, I mean, here's some dollars that not necessarily be set aside by the board. They're going to be set aside for us for routine restricted maintenance activities. So that could free up some dollars out of the $5 million that we have other places, depending on what we're spending on.
Does the legislature define what is routine maintenance? Do they have a specific things? This is routine maintenance. This is not.
They do. It's probably a liberal interpretation. I mean, clearly we can't build something that's not routine maintenance.
Okay.
So
But a
typically capital outlay
refurbishment?
are not really part of that, but it would be to, I mean, a lot of what you say or hear with that $1 billion book, I mean, those are maintenance items. Those are items that would fall under
Right.
this.
Paint,
What they don't allow is
dry
deferred
rot.
maintenance type. Well, I don't want to say they don't allow it. Back when you had a deferred maintenance program, you could not do roofing. You couldn't do any deferred maintenance type of expenditures because you had a fund for that. That went away. There's no more deferred maintenance fund. We have our own. You have allowed us, that $5 million has allowed us to really have our own deferred maintenance fund. So there's an example where the rules changed a little bit. It's a lot more liberal than it used to be, but I would not, because of the condition of our facilities, I would not recommend using these dollars for any additions or anything that's cannot be considered routine restricted maintenance.
Paint, carpet, flooring,
Right.
or anything. Not. And then we use our Prop 39 to do air conditioning and those kind of things. Air conditioning units.
Lights. But
Lights.
at some future board meeting, maybe the next one, you will hear a proposal for possibly using those dollars as well, or
Okay.
the savings from those projects as well, to do high school type projects. So yes. So in special education, we all know it's underfunded by the state and federal governments. You'll see that on the next slide, and you can see how the anticipated contribution just for costs associated with that program rise every year. Pension, other things, go from $40.3 million in the current year to $45 million. We're not outside of any averages. I mean, we're right with other districts our size or the state of California, but this is why. If you take a look at this right here, the bottom, the blue, is state funding. Now, this is not for us. This is averages for the state of California. So if you look at the bottom, that's state funding, AB 602 dollars that go to special education. The red, the middle, is federal funding, IDEA funds. and you can see how that is shrinking and projected to continue to shrink. If you want to know why, well, what happened in 9-10, why the big balloon, those were the stimulus dollars, the ARA funds, the Obama dollars, whatever they were referred to. So that was an infusion of federal dollars at that point in time to help with recovery. And then the green bar, those are local funds. Those are contributions out of really, I mean, the classroom dollars. Now, one could argue special education is classroom, so the dollars stay within the classroom. But this shows you how this program, probably our most needy pupils, for whatever reason, is significantly underfunded by the state and federal governments and requires a contribution that comes right out of our base revenue.
So I jump in here and get Mr. Herbst going, only because at some point we have to sit down and I do when we get a little bit of wiggle room here, have you sort of walk me through some of this, because I think the other thing that makes me nervous here, because I didn't say much about STRS and PERS, but special education, you see that number's rising and it's continuing to rise as far as expenses. It's not necessarily just what they're not giving us, but our costs are also going up, and it's not just us, it's statewide, it's very expensive. And I'm not clear what my questions are, but I do know that I want to at some point sit down and get you to sort of do the deep dive with me and sort of look at where we're at and best practices and comparisons and so forth. It's a complicated subject, but it's clearly getting more expensive every year, and we're continually being underfunded at a, for lack of a better term, monster level. That we have nothing that we have to fund this, but it's not even remotely inexpensive. Everything about it's expensive.
Identification rates to across the board, mild, moderate, and moderate severe disabilities. That's where you're seeing it start, and then there's a lot of areas that's why there's a big increase.
So by that you mean there's just more kids that are qualifying for services.
Children with autism, they're being found
Okay.
eligible, and there's a whole sort of Valley Mountain Regional Center that feeds through us, 150% increase in terms of the number of kids that they're seeing. So yeah, that's probably right back into us. So kids with more severe disabilities getting identified earlier is a big cost.
Great.
Which sort of means you're like, parents are getting better idea of how to know that their children are in trouble than in the past, where it would have, where that slips under and it didn't get noticed. But now that we're IDing more students, we're taking care of more that we're slipping through the cracks maybe.
And Trustee Brown, Trustee Brown has a question.
Just curious, are we seeing any additional unfunded mandates coming from the federal government, or has that slowed?
I would say the unfunded mandates is slow.
Yeah, not for special education. Right.
There was a couple things on the Hughes bill a while back that was more of a state requirement that was an unfunded mandate, but since that time, no, just complete underfunding. Is really sad.
Yeah.
Going back to budget control, I mean, I got to tell you, Mark in special ed and also the administration does an amazing job containing our costs. As was said, I mean, these are costs we had. These are mandated by law. I mean, many of these costs are mandated by law, and still to control them the way we're doing, at what seems to be an exorbitant level. But I mean, when you look at other districts' percentages, I mean, we're not above averages across the state of California. Especially for the identification numbers that we're seeing. So they do a great job of controlling our costs, but really the biggest factor is nobody's funding these students to the level that they should be funded. I think that's really the takeaway. Okay, and so again, outside of staffing, enrollment drives our revenue, enrollment drives our expenses. So that's really one of the most important things that we do for our multi-year projection. And we use a 3-year cohort progression method. You've seen that from planning as they come and give you an update on our enrollment. And just looking at again, this is amazing, and I think this shows, I mean, why our revenue isn't trending down in a lot of cases. I mean, it's remarkably stable, I think, when you look at this, even though for 17-18 and 18-19 we see slight dips. And if you're wondering why there's a gray bar but only starting in 13-14, that's because that's when we started tracking our unduplicated pupil. And so you can see on the elementary level what a high number of students that we serve that are identified students for one of those 3 areas. High school, we had a little dip, and now we're coming back. we're coming back up. And then you can see our unduplicated pupil percentage is growing, but not to the level because of our feeder districts of the high schools, not to the level of what you see in our elementary districts. So, and again, this is just for your reference as you talk about budget monitoring, what we do in the brick building, and then what we're going to bring to you at certain times of the year for budget monitoring purposes. So themes for the May revision, we do now have a May revision. We all know the economy. I mean, if you read the paper or watch the news, the economy is getting better, not only nationally, but statewide. We're continuing to grow. And so we thought that there would be some further enhancements to the governor's proposal from January. But as we look at the January budget revision, or the January budget to the May revision, we don't see a lot of growth as far as education goes. So they're continuing to fund Proposition 98 at the minimum guarantee. We would like it. I mean, they treat the floor as a ceiling in Sacramento. And that's, you know, we would like it to really be what it is. But they use the minimum guarantee. And then you can see at the bottom the one time where any growth came in one-time discretionary funds. So those are taken away for the next year. Again, just show, again, we thought, all these people thought, you know, hey, there's more money coming in, but this governor is, this governor is conservative and not going to over appropriate, what he thinks is an over appropriation. We talk about purchasing power. I mean, you saw the increase in revenue. That was a great thing. That was a great historic times the last 5 years. But we're losing that. We're losing that in purchasing power. The local control funding formula, again, was only to give us back what was taken from us to today's level. It didn't account for those other cost increases that we talked about. School Services did an analysis, $20 billion in new funding. That sounds like a lot. If I was out in the public, if I was a community member, I'd be like, what are you complaining about? Yep. You're getting new money. You should have locks. You should have security cameras. You should have gates. But that's not the case. $2.8 billion, or 14%, has been used to fund other costs. So our costs have gone up as well as the dollars going up. So, and they will continue to go up now that local control funding formula is fully implemented. This just shows you, again, if you track the yellow, 15-16 was a great year. We know that. But look at how, it's dropped off. But the red line, our expenses, look at that line. So again, that's just a concern. Going back, here we are. Again, I just want to show you this. We're in the second longest recovery, ever. And that's got to end at some point in time.
10's the magic
but,
number.
I mean, this is good. This is good economic times. At what point does it end? Nobody knows. Maybe, again, just showing you what the May revision provides. The gap is now 100% closed, and we're going to be facing years now of just minimal 2 to 3% increases in the out years. Progress towards implementation, we're fully implemented. So you see this, the projection is the dashed line at the bottom. We were supposed to be fully funded at 2020-21. We're going to be fully funded in 2018-19. A steep increase between the years of 15-16 and now got us to fully funded sooner rather than what was projected. So just talking about some assembly bills that we're monitoring, that we may even be supporting, is Assembly Bill 2808. It would increase the per pupil amounts based on these grade spans. Now, that doesn't mean they would fund them immediately, but that would create a new target. And so, which is good because now we're going to have a target. We're going to have something to shoot for. And so if Assembly Bill 2808 passes, they would be set at these rates. Currently, kindergarten through third grade is $8,180. 4 through 6 is $7,520. 7A to 7,744. and 912 is 9,206. So you can see that this sets the bar. But if the economy turns, we're not going to be able to get to the bar very soon. But it's nice to know that somebody in Sacramento is taking a look at this and realizing that our base grants need to go up just in order to account for our increasing costs. Also,
Can I ask one question there? Or at least one concern? It seems to me, I guess, my lack of trust of Sacramento says that if they do this, the other piece we'd have to watch is if they move the base grant up, make sure they don't mess with the supplemental and the other two parts,
Right.
the concentration grants,
Right.
because they can be sneaky and say, I'm going to give it to you in one hand and take it out of your pocket with the other, because
right.
at least that's my first radar point is great, but they make me nervous.
And we have a whole new governor, so you don't know, or we will have a whole new governor.
Yep.
So you don't know where the priorities are going to lie. Yes. I'm sorry. I know I went kind of quick. K3 is right now 8,180. Did you get the rest of them? Okay. I'm sorry? Yeah, 4.6 currently is 7,520. 7.8 is 7,744. And 9.12 currently is 9,206. Those are our dollars
What did you say
today,
the first one was?
1819. So something new for 1819 is the governor's proposal for fiscal transparency. It requires the local control funding budget overview for parents. We have to use language that is understandable and accessible to parents and guardians. Sometimes the way I talk or Michelle talks may not go well over in the community. So this is a requirement. The local control funding formula budget overview for parents will be considered as part of the adoption of the LCAP or annual update. However, we don't expect a template prior to January 30, 2019. So this is coming. There's a push to be more fiscally transparent or more accountable to the dollars that have been provided for us through the local control funding formula. Other legislation we're watching?
Cindy's up.
I just have a question, but so not necessarily on that, but when does the proposition that we passed end? That I was thinking it was 2021, but we had the one that was prior to that, and then there was the
Prop
top
30 prior
1%,
to that.
and then the next one was like Prop 51. I want to say Prop 51, but 55.
You're talking about the statewide,
Yep.
Yeah.
there's it's not anytime soon.
Oh, okay.
Because we're not seeing any reduction in our projection years, to
Okay.
to account for that.
I just
So,
couldn't remember the date that it
I'll
ended.
I'll
so-
get those and give the board an update on that.
Okay.
AB 3136, this is important. I mean, we think it's important. It would equalize special education funding and create a funding mechanism for state support of special education preschool. I mean, these are things we don't have. This would be important to us. It's sponsored by California Association of School Business Officials and the Coalition for Adequate Funding for Special Ed. It has a $1.3 billion cost tag, so you can see that this would take some time, even if approved, to be implemented. Back to CTE, talked about that earlier. The governor is proposing, AB 1743 would extend the CTE incentive grant. That is supposed to end June 30th of this year, 2018. We're watching this one closely because that would, that would give us some funding, annual funding for the CTE incentive grant. School safety legislation, SB 1269, would delay the requirement by 1 year that all school buses are equipped with child safety alerts. This is where you have to go to the back of the bus and shut it off. You have to check to make sure there's no students on the bus. Our buses are equipped with this, but they're delaying implementation of this under SB 1269 by 1 year. But we already have those on our buses. And AB 1798 would require no later than July 1, 2035, any school bus to be equipped with passenger restraint systems. So right now, every bus we have has to come with, so by that point in time, all of our older buses will be aged out. So we'll have new buses that have the safety restraint systems in them. So this would not be an issue with us. More about school safety AB 2291 would require districts to adopt on or before December 31, 2019 procedures for preventing acts of bullying. AB 1983 would require before 1920 to contract with a local law enforcement agency to provide a full security assessment of school districts' facilities and emergency practices. And then SB 1203 would require every public or private school that has enrollment of 50 or more to conduct a drill relating to active threats at least once per school year. Right now, there is no requirement for that. There's no requirement to have, we have fire drills, there's a requirement for that, but right now, there is no legislated mandated requirement for this type of training or drill.
So these bills that we're reviewing, are any of them coming to the voters for vote, or are they?
They're in the assembly.
At the assembly?
No, these are in Sacramento. Yeah, we're just watching them. We're watching the process to see how they progress. So,
I have one question because you were moving quickly, which is a good thing. Going back to the CTE,
Yeah.
and I'll go pull it up, but when they do this, it makes me nervous because they don't just talk about K through 12. They tend to say CTE and they carve a bunch of it out and throw it into the junior colleges and colleges, and we don't get as much of it. And so I guess I'm curious, and I'll go look, is that $500 million annually for K through 12, or is it going to be JCs and colleges that tend to pull some of that away from us?
it may be K-14 because there's some overlap between us.
Yes.
But this would be for us. This would be for our CT incentive grant.
Outstanding.
So yes, this is.
Feeling warm and fuzzy.
School facilities, I just threw this up here, just again for another warm and fuzzy, I guess. If you look at the GEO bonds that have passed 55%, that would be if we move forward, 500 have passed, and then only 69 have failed. So I mean, since 2012. So there is some support out there locally. Because of the age and condition of school facilities, to provide local funds to meet those needs.
Going back to SB 1203, you were saying that there's no mandate yet for those kinds of safety drills that would educate everybody in the school, administrators, students, and teachers about conducting these drills.
Mhm.
So if there's no mandate, someone mentioned earlier that we were doing those drills.
Right.
Are we ahead of this game, or?
We do lockdown drills, yes. And I guess the point is we're doing those. A lot of people call them active shooter training or active shooter drills, but our active shooter drill is called a lockdown drill. And we do those. And it's not required, so we don't have to do those. So yes, I guess you would say we are ahead of the game. I'm assuming most districts are doing that, lockdown drills, in light of today's activities. But SB 1203 would require, we would have to do it at least once a year. We would be required to do it at least once a year, like our fire drills right now, that we have. They're mandated. Our fire drills are.
And I think one of the other things we do that I think we should talk more about is, and I'll get corrected if I'm wrong, but I think we're ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. I think when you look at our PBIS programs, and we get hit a lot on the restorative justice things, and when I've looked at these numbers statewide, Modesto City Schools is leaps and bounds ahead of what others are doing, and there's always improvement that needs to be made. But when I'm reading a lot of this stuff that they're asking other folks to do, we're 3, 4, 5 years into that process already, and really are on the top of the curve. And I really do feel good about it. And at some point, maybe we do some presentations on it when you look at how we compare to the rest of the state. And we really do. When I say we're ahead by a large margin, and that does feel good. Yes. Yes, absolutely agree, which is why I sort of jumped in there to want to say that we really do need to do and get that out so that folks realize that, the amount of work that Ed Services has put into some of these programs over the last 4 or 5 years is monumental, and really should be held up and lifted up to a much higher level, because they've worked extraordinarily hard to get these things done.
I just included this again. I thought this was interesting.
Yes, it is.
Stanislaus County 45% of our population is able to purchase a median priced home. So that probably talks about the cost of home in Stanislaus County, but also the ability of families in Stanislaus County compared to the statewide average of 29. San Francisco is 12%. So again, there's a lot of conclusions you can draw from this, depending on how you're looking at it. But I just thought this was kind of interesting as we're talking about enrollment growth or facilities or anything like that. So,
And just for the fun fact to go with this one, as that number gets worse and worse going to the right, somebody should do a correlation of how much traffic is out there going from this direction to that direction. Because I've been driving for 18 years now, and it is as bad as I have ever seen it, because folks can't afford to live in the Bay Area, and so they're out here renting or buying to do the commute. But it's phenomenal how much traffic is out there right now, going back and forth.
okay, so this is a state calendar. So what we can expect between now and then, by June 15th, there's a constitutional deadline for both houses and the governor to agree on a final state budget. Many times that's met, many times it's not met in the past, so it depends on the economy. And then by June 30th, the governor is supposed to act, again, constitutionally on the state budget. For us, June 4th, you will have a public hearing, so you'll see a lot of this information in the public hearing, as far as we will talk about things that have been added as of this workshop, whether that's Wilson Cafeteria, high school facilities. I mean, you'll see those and how it impacts our bottom line. And then it gives a chance for the public to come and weigh in on the budget as well, in relation and also with the LCAP public hearing for that. So I know I rushed at the end. I tried to honor the time, but I'll take any questions if the board wants.
You did great. Thank you so much. This was great information. I just wanted to say that I looked it up online and I found out that 2024 is when Prop 55 ends. Prop 55 was an extension of Prop 30 for 12 more years, and Prop 30 passed in 2012.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Looked it up.
So then when Michelle and I are doing our
Yeah.
2022 budget,
That's right.
with our multi-year projection, we may have a concern that there's potentially less revenue coming in Prop 98. So
I don't want to cut off any questions. I just want to relocate, so when we're done with the questions, I can say a couple comments.
I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. Very helpful. Thank you.
thank you. You're welcome.
Great.
I-
Thank
and
you.
Yes, as a first timer, it was easy to follow.
Thank you.
It was understandable. I think you met that requirement. At least I believe it was. So we'll see what our public
Well
thought.
worth the wait.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
You're
right.
welcome.
Well, you just said a lot of the things I was going to say, but I do want to acknowledge again Tim, Michelle, and Jennifer. Jennifer, even though she's fairly new to this actual department, in the budget department, she's not new to us. She's been a well-respected and very helpful employee for a number of years over the Child Development Program, and we are just so fortunate to have these three people. And you heard tonight, Tim doing the presentation. And really has for a person who was not a teacher by trade, can really provide the information in a real positive way. But he did mention a number of times, going back to Michelle and all the work that Michelle has done for this budget and for the many years. And so when you're talking about the financial status of our district and it's being on solid footing, it all starts with a strong budget, the position controls, the work that the HR does with the budget department. So this doesn't happen by accident. And so I just want to go on record and acknowledge these people for their outstanding work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. All right. Any more business on this? Any more questions? All right. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. It's been moved by Trustee Walker and seconded by Trustee Brown. All those in favor, state aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
All right. No, I'm glad you